Hi, are you struggling with understanding what research methodology is? Then join me in this short video to understand the basic idea of research methodology. Before we start this discussion, kindly like, share, and comment on this video. Also kindly subscribe to the channel. Let's start with answering the question, what is research methodology? So what is research methodology? Research methodology embodies the specific techniques used in a research project for doing the following to data or information about the research subject. The first technique in your research methodology is the technique of identifying data or information about the research subject. Here we expect you to tell us what kind of data or information is suitable for describing the research subject. So let's consider, for example, a topic like analyzing the effect of inflation on the cost of household commodities. What would be the kind of data needed for describing this particular subject matter? In this case, inflation and the cost of household commodities. Here we would expect you to provide us with data on the cost of household commodities before the inflation period and possibly data on the cost of household commodities during or after the inflation period. The second technique in your research methodology is the technique of selecting data or information about the research subject. This is very important because the data identified may be too large for you to handle, and as such you would need to streamline such data that you've identified to something small enough for you to handle. So there are so many tools or so many ways to get this done, and I'm going to be discussing that in my next video on research methodology. But take note of the fact that selecting data or information about the research subject is a second technique in research methodology. A third technique in your research methodology is the technique of processing data or information about the research subject. Take note of the fact that when data is identified and collected from the field and subsequently selected because it is too large, it is very important that such a data must be processed. What does processing data mean? Processing data simply means organizing the data and describing the data so as to enable analysis and subsequent interpretation to be done effectively. So the third technique in research methodology is the processing of data or information about the research subject. And that brings me to the fourth technique in research methodology. This technique is the technique of analyzing data or information about the research subject. Analyzing data or information about the research subject simply means using statistical tools and logical tools for describing or evaluating the data. This is very important, and there are so many tools for doing this. I'm going to be talking about these tools in my next video on research methodology. Having said those things about research methodology, let us now answer the question, in what chapter of my research project should I discuss my research methodology? The answer to this question is simple. Research methodology is usually discussed in the third chapter of a typical research project. This is not to say that it must be found in the third chapter. It may vary, but usually it is found in the third chapter of a typical research project. And this brings me to another question I must answer in this video. Must every research project have a research methodology? My answer to this question is yes. Every research project must have a research methodology. Now let's answer the question, why must a research project have a research methodology? The first reason why a research project must have a research methodology is that it guides the researcher on how to effectively carry out the investigation. So without your research methodology component in your research project, you can't be guided as a researcher on how to effectively carry out the investigation. The second reason why a research project must have a research methodology is that it gives a reader insight on how the research project was carried out. So it is with your research methodology that any reader who looks at your work would know that this is how this research was implemented, or this is how this investigation was carried out. And that brings me to another question. Is research methodology the same in structure for all academic fields? My answer to this question is no. Research methodology may vary from field to field, but this depends on the nature of the research. Take note of that. Having said all these, do you want to know how the structure of a research methodology varies from field to field? Then watch out for my next video on research methodology.